Apple now offers a big 13-inch iPad Air that actually puts it almost identically in size to Apple's MacBook Air. And both are great options for someone who needs a lightweight laptop. But while I thought this 13-inch iPad Air would make a great laptop replacement, the more I looked at it, the less it all made sense. Now, what does make sense is securing your bank account, your credit cards, your password, and your entire digital life with Trend Micro's Premium Security Suite. Yes, whether it's your MacBook or your iPad or your iPhone or anywhere you browse the internet, Trend Micro has you covered with a complete list of security tools, including mobile security on the go that can block dangerous and fraudulent websites, protect you against unsafe Wi-Fi networks, or prevent unwanted access to your device, and guards against identity theft, phishing scams, and banking fraud, while also alerting you of data leaks and password leaks on the dark web. Trend Micro's mobile security helps me tackle all of these security threats on the go easily and recommends good security practices with a one-tap security scan, which exposes your security vulnerabilities and tells you easy steps on how to fix them. And it is loaded with features. My favorite is the Wi-Fi checker, which can check your current Wi-Fi connection to see if it's secure. It's great for going out to the cafe or whenever connecting to a public Wi-Fi network. I also love the built-in safe surfing web browser, which can instantly block unsafe websites, third-party trackers, and allows you to turn off those annoying ads with just a tap. To protect your devices and your complete online identity, click the link in the description to learn more about Trend Micro's Premium Security Suite. And thank you to Trend Micro for keeping my data protected and for sponsoring this video. To truly understand my epiphany here, we need to take a hard look at both devices. And that really all starts with price, right? The M3 MacBook Air retails for $1,099. And for that price point, it is a solid laptop and a really good value. Now, the 13-inch iPad Air looks like a good value, right? It starts at an even lower $799. But when we're looking at the iPad Air, especially this 13-inch version, a lot of people expect to use it as more of a laptop replacement rather than just a full-blown tablet. And in this video, I'm really interested in exploring the idea of using an iPad as a laptop replacement. So we have to add on Apple's Magic Keyboard to the equation. Now, yes, you could go for a cheaper setup using a third-party keyboard or even using a keyboard that's not directly attached to the iPad, but let's just assume you are going for Apple's Magic Keyboard. That's, an apples to apples comparison, if you will, and it's clearly the setup that Apple wants you to go with. Now, this keyboard for the iPad Air adds on another $350 to the price point, bringing this really reasonably priced $799 iPad up to $1,150, putting it $100 above the MacBook Air. Of course, I know there's going to be a big argument in the comments talking about the cheaper 11-inch iPad Air and why didn't I include it in this comparison? Well, you know what? You're not catching Greg off guard. I'm going to include it in this comparison as well. So you could opt for the 11-inch iPad Air, bringing the iPad starting price back down to an even more affordable $599. However, again, we're gonna be fair. Let's add on that Magic Keyboard to the price point, and you can see that brings this all the way up to $899, which is still cheaper than this M3 Air. So maybe this 11-inch iPad makes a lot more sense, right? Now, I'm not gonna make it that simple. There's a twist coming, right? And that's the starting storage. The Air starts with 128 gigabytes of storage. And to upgrade to the same starting storage as this MacBook Air, you need to spend an additional $100. Aha! This 11-inch Air still wins. It's $100 cheaper than the MacBook Air. And we can end this video right here because you're all so smart, you all figured it out, right? Well, not so fast. It's a twist within a twist. Shyamalan. You've been Shyamalan.
What a twist!
Listen. We gave the iPad Air a second chance with this smaller 11-inch version, so I think it's only fair we give the MacBook Air another chance by giving the option of getting the M2 model. Oh, I got you there. There was another M2 MacBook Air right there in front of the camera. You didn't even see it. The M2 model starts at $999, the same price as this 11-inch iPad Air with 256 gigabytes of storage and with the Magic Keyboard accessory. So you can either get the M2 Air at the same price point as an 11-inch iPad Air with the Magic Keyboard, or you can get the M3 Air for less than the total cost of a 13-inch iPad Air with a keyboard. Either way you look at it, to me, the MacBook Air wins at being the better value. Now, I just threw this in there to trip you up in this comparison, but we're really going to be focusing on the 13-inch Air versus the 13-inch MacBook Air. That's the point of this video, and those are the rules I set. Well, what about portability? I just did a lot of coverage on the iPad Pro, which is super portable, and the iPad Air should be even more portable than the iPad Pro. Well, not really. So even though this is called the Air, both versions of the iPad Air actually weigh a tiny bit more than their iPad Pro counterparts, and they're also thicker. But what about the MacBook Air? Well, that's still the lightest laptop in Apple's lineup, weighing in at 2.7 pounds. And if you compare just the tablet and the MacBook, the iPad Air is obviously thinner and lighter. But once you take the Magic Keyboard into the equation, well, it adds on even more weight than the iPad itself. It weighs 1.56 pounds, bringing the total combination of the weight up to 2.92 pounds, which is heavier than the Air. To make matters worse, when you combine the keyboard and the iPad Air, the total package is actually, get this, thicker than the MacBook Air. So when you look at the total package of the iPad Air versus the MacBook Air is technically more portable than an iPad. All right, but what about the keyboard? Which one actually has the better typing experience? Well, the iPad Air actually has a pretty decent keyboard with very similar keys to the MacBook Air. Both provide a really nice typing experience with good travel for their slim design, and both feel very comfortable to type on. However, the iPad Air does have some compromises. First of all, its Magic Keyboard does not have a row of function keys, which is helpful for quick actions like changing the volume or brightness. Secondly, the trackpad on the iPad Air's keyboard uses a dive board mechanism, and although you get a real physical click, it is not as responsive as the MacBook Air's all-glass haptic trackpad, which lets you press anywhere on the trackpad with the same amount of force and registers as a click. And the MacBook Air's trackpad is also much larger, providing more room for swiping and gestures. The MacBook Air, it's a pure laptop, and it offers a better keyboard and trackpad experience. Well, what about ports? The MacBook Air is infamous at this point for not providing a good selection of ports. And yeah, you only get 2 Thunderbolt USB-C ports, a MagSafe charging port, and a headphone jack. That's it. That's pretty limited on a laptop. However, you probably know this, you're smart. The iPad Air, it's much more limited. First of all, the iPad itself only has a single USB-C port that does not have fast Thunderbolt speeds. And the second USB-C port, which is located on the Magic Keyboard, is even worse because you can only use this port for charging. You can't use any data-related accessories and connect it to this port. So, even though the MacBook Air doesn't have that many ports, you still get 2 very capable USB-C ports, a dedicated charging port, which the iPad doesn't have, and then you also get a headphone jack, which the iPad Air doesn't even have. So the MacBook Air wins in that category as well. What about speakers? Well, the iPad Air actually has outward-facing speakers, while the MacBook Air, the speakers are kind of hidden underneath the keyboard. There's actually no speaker grills here, and the sound comes up from the keyboard. So you might even expect, even though this is a tablet, that the iPad Air will sound better. But unfortunately for the iPad Air, it only has a 2-speaker system, unlike the iPad Pro's excellent 4-speaker system, which might actually sound better than the MacBook Air. So even though the Air does get pretty decently loud, and it sounds clear enough, the MacBook Air speakers, despite being hidden under the keyboard, get even louder than the iPad Air, and they sound clearer, and they have more bass than what you get out of the iPad Air speakers. Okay, well, what about authentication? Well, this one is actually funny because it seems one thing both of these devices share in common is that they both use Touch ID. Now, Touch ID on the MacBook Air is placed on the power button, which I prefer when using it in laptop mode. It's just a little easier to reach than the power button placement of the Touch ID sensor on the iPad Air. But if you're using the iPad Air in tablet mode, it would kind of be dumb to put that sensor on the keyboard. So even though I kind of prefer the MacBook Air's placement here, I'm not going to overthink it. They both use Touch ID, so this is kind of a tie here. Well, what about battery life? That's a really important metric, and the iPad has always been the gold standard. 10 hours of battery life on a single charge. No one's complaining, right? And those ratings are more or less the same with this iPad Air. It obviously depends how heavily you use it, of course, but with mixed usage, I would say that you can expect about 7 to 10 hours of nonstop use. It's good, but it is no longer the battery life champion that this device used to be, because that title now belongs to these Apple Silicon MacBooks. And the MacBook Air has an official 18-hour battery life rating from Apple, and this laptop can easily be used for multiple days for a few hours at a time on a single charge, and you can power through your demanding workdays on a single charge. That's because the iPad and MacBook both use a very similar M-series chip architecture, and there's just a lot less space inside of the iPad Air for battery capacity. The MacBook Air has nearly double the battery capacity of an iPad Air, so if you do the same workloads on both devices and use similar apps, you have so much extra headroom to work with the MacBook Air's battery. I even find that standby time for the MacBook Air seems to be much longer than the iPad Air, especially if you keep the Magic Keyboard or the Apple Pencil connected to the Air. I know I can still reliably come back to something like the MacBook Air and find the battery still kicking. Like sometimes I'll come back to the iPad, and after not using it for a few days, I find that the battery's dead. But with my MacBook Air, I can reliably not use this for a few days, come back, open it up, and I still find that there's plenty of battery life left to use. So I come back to the iPad a little bit disappointed with its standby time. Then there's the chip itself. Listen, we don't need to drag this out in performance benchmarks or how long it takes to export a video. The iPad Air, it has an M2 chip. We're comparing it against the M3 MacBook Air. That has an M3 chip. The M3 chip is newer. It has a faster CPU, faster GPU. It has support for hardware accelerated ray tracing. And unlike in the past, it's pretty easy just to look at the chip number now and see which computer is going to have better performance, especially because the iPad Air and MacBook Air both lack a fan. So both chips, even thermally, should behave pretty similarly. Perhaps even with a slight edge to the MacBook Air because it has a little bit more room in the body for heat dissipation. So even with performance, the MacBook Air takes the cake here. It wins, right? The M3, it's faster than the M2. I hope this is not a controversial statement here. We can do simple arithmetic on the channel, right? Okay, good. The lead on the MacBook Air extends even further with perhaps the most important subject matter, the operating system. Sure, the iPad has made leaps and bounds with its capabilities since its inception, and it can do a lot of things that it used to not be able to do, right? It can do multitasking, it can do windowed multitasking, it has really good external display support now, and it has some truly professional caliber apps that take full advantage of the iPad's amazing hardware. More importantly than that, for most users, it is just very easy to use. The user interface feels similar to the smartphones they're already using, and it's so locked down that you can hand this iPad to anyone and they're not going to mess up their computer by installing some rogue third-party client or some weird browser extension that hijacks the URL bar. The iPad, it's a safe environment for many, but because of that, it is naturally more limited than macOS. macOS still provides a safe enough environment, but with a bit of a learning curve. But once you get past that initial learning curve, it's just a more robust operating system. macOS excels at managing files, downloading apps from the App Store or on third-party websites, and even has more third-party tools to customize your OS experience. macOS is also easier for multitasking with more than 4 windows, hooking up multiple external accessories like solid-state drives, or now even running multiple monitors on the M3 Air. And its pro applications are usually more feature-filled than similar ones found on the iPad, and you can run those apps without fear of background tasks stopping or apps being refreshed in the background. You get to manage macOS rather than macOS managing you. And the more I list, the more it seems clear that for a true laptop, the MacBook Air just keeps winning and winning and winning in almost every single category. So, is there anything at all that this iPad Air is better at as a laptop replacement? Well, there are a few things. One of those would be cameras, right? The iPad Air now features a camera in the landscape orientation, just like it would on the MacBook Air, which is great for laptop use. The Air has a fixed 1080p webcam, which looks okay, but it won't win any awards, right? And yeah, the iPad Air's camera isn't going to win any awards for video quality either, but they're both good enough. The Air just takes the category because, well, I like that it has the center stage feature on its camera. I like that. And it also has a rear-facing camera, even though it's a pretty outdated 12 megapixel resolution camera with like the same camera sensor as the one from the iPad Pro in 2018. And it's also missing the flash, which is on the new iPad Pro and on the iPad mini. But despite that, having a camera on the back is better than having nothing on the back, right? And there's also the display. Now, for the most part, it's kind of shocking how close the display is on the M2 iPad Air compared to the M3 MacBook Air, because both use an LCD panel running at 60 Hertz and both look about the same in color accuracy and both have a P3 wide color display, right? There is one small advantage for the Air though. It has a slightly brighter 600 nit display. But besides that, they look kind of identical. But there is one big advantage that the iPad Air has with its display that changes everything. Well, number one, the display isn't permanently attached. It's a big tablet with a big display, but it is a tablet nonetheless. And a tablet has a screen that you can touch. The MacBook Air doesn't. This means you can pick up your iPad and do revolutionary things like bring it to your couch or your toilet and use it in a much lighter and more convenient form factor that does feel nicer when browsing the web or reading through emails, and a much better place to read a book on than hunched over staring at your MacBook screen. It also means a whole different class of apps that would not work at all with a Mac laptop. With an accessory like the Apple Pencil Pro, you can draw directly on the iPad Air's big display, which makes it amazing as a cheaper drawing tablet for artists. It's also great for students or anyone that wants more flexibility and the ability to take handwritten notes. The touchscreen enables further flexibility, letting the iPad transform itself into things like virtual instruments, or a camera monitor, or a plethora of other side benefits. Listen, there is a lot to like about this larger iPad Air, and I get why people would want an iPad. It is not a bad device. It's actually quite a good and affordable option when you compare it against the very expensive and costly iPad Pro. As an option or an alternative to the iPad Pro, the iPad Air, that's where it makes sense. However, I can't help but look at the target audience for this large iPad as a cheaper laptop alternative. And for most people, it just doesn't make sense when the M3 MacBook Air is right there. When this product exists and it's lighter, more portable, more powerful, has better battery life, and is cheaper than a 13-inch iPad Air with the Magic Keyboard accessory, and at least for me, much more capable, it just makes a lot of sense to not even look at the iPad Air and just to pick up a Mac.
I even waited to publish this video until after Apple's WWDC to see if iPadOS 18 would bring over some software features that would make it somehow more compelling than a MacBook Air, and there wasn't really anything there that would change my opinion at this point on whether I should recommend a MacBook Air or an iPad Air as a pure laptop replacement. So if you had to pick one, I'm still leaning with the MacBook Air, and there were more improvements with macOS Sequoia as a whole, at least to me, than there were on iPadOS 18. So if you're waiting for a software update to fix this, it's just not here.
And that is kind of sad for me to say, because I thought this was a pretty nice announcement to see Apple bring a big iPad down to a cheaper price point. And I think Apple could have fixed this pretty easily. Like, if Apple kind of maybe made the price of their Magic Keyboard get a price cut, like the old Magic Keyboard, maybe bring that accessory down to $200, I think you would have a much better value proposition when you're building out the iPad Air as a full laptop replacement, at least putting it on equal footing with the price point of a M2 MacBook Air. But unfortunately, unless you really need a touchscreen or prefer iPadOS, my recommendation is with the MacBook Air. So yeah, in terms of a laptop replacement, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But hopefully my video made sense. So if it did, I hope you give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed. And I really hope the video helped you out in deciding between this iPad Air, and a MacBook Air. And I hope you come back for more. That's all I got to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.